Thank you
Whenever.
thank you for the introduction. I will show you a part of my PhD project that is widely spread and has so many different parts. So first of all, why do we have to talk about assessment? Etymological meanings is to provide value to something or someone. And we consider assessment as a continuous process that underlies all the good teaching and learning. And in research, we can find, in research, we can find the four main assessment approaches that we can use in schools and in higher education, that are the summative assessment, the formative assessment, the assessment for learning, and the sustainable assessment. And you can see here a brief overview of all the four approaches and their purpose and their practices. But what I want to focus is the actors that are involved in the assessment approaches. So for the summative assessment and the formative assessment, we consider the main and the only actors are the teachers. So they are involved in the design and implementing the assessment practices in class or in groups. Whereas the assessment for learning and sustainable assessment are approaches that consider teachers and students are both involved in the design and implementing the assessment process. For example, I already did my cases because I'm a primary teacher and I focused on the peer feedback and the peer assessment. So we are trying to construct criteria for assessment with students in class, and then we can use the same criteria for the development of feedback in peer and also for the inner feedback. And also you can use the same criteria for the same assessment, for the self-assessment. So we also can focus on the major grading methods that are also developed in the research. So we can find, for example, the letter grades, the plus or minus with the letter grades, the percentage grades, the pass or failing grading, or the narrative test. In Italy, in the schools, we usually use the grades, so the marks from 1 to 10. But as a teacher and as a researcher, I always have to ask me if this type of feedback, so the grades, are an effective feedback for the assessment process. And we can say that yes, but also no. So yes, because grades offer an overall appraisal of students' current level of performance. They facilitate the interpretation for students, but also, and it's very important, for families. And then they serve the summative and formative assessment. But on the other hand, we can say that grades don't provide details information for the students in order to provide guidance for or direction for improving. And they have also negative effect on students' motivation and quality of thinking. So we are considering the narrative feedbacks as one of the major tools that we can use in schools and with students to improve their learning. Narrative feedbacks are information provided by an agent or the context about the gap between the actual level and the reference level. And it's part of the assessment process, and it's useful for improving learning. And we consider the narrative feedbacks in their meaning as a dialogic process, where the students actively construct, monitors, and evaluates their own learning. So in this theoretical framework, I will show you some guidelines that we have in Italy for the assessment of schools. Because if we want to study our context, we also have to know how can we discuss and how the Ministry of Education in Italy discuss about assessment in schools. So we focus on the middle schools and high schools. So for my project and specifically for this contribution, we are looking at the middle schools and the high schools, not the primary school or preschool, and not the higher education. For the lower secondary school or the middle school, we can say that we have two main laws. The national indication for the curriculum of for preschool, the first cycle of education. First cycles means the primary schools and the middle schools together, and the legislative decree of 2017. So in the national indication, we can read that the assessment assumes a formative function that precedes, accompanies, and follows the curriculum path. Whereas in the legislative decree, you can see that we have to express the assessment with marks from 1 to 10. For the high schools, we have the decree of the President of the Republic in 2009 that says that we also have to use the tens, so from 1 to 10 grades to express our assessment. And in 2017, we have the same legislative decree says that, and it says that we use assessment in its formative and educational purpose. So in order to contribute to the improvement of learning, to document the development of personal identity, and to promote the self-assessment. So lots of information about assessment. So on one hand, we have the research, the international and national research that says that assessment for learning and sustainable assessment are the approaches that have the greatest impact on the assessment learning processes, also from a lifelong learning perspective. And on the other hand, we have the national guidelines for assessment in schools that indicates the formative function of assessment processes. And we are trying with my research and my PhD project to improve in some way the assessment culture from a summative and formative view to a view of assessment more educational, more participatory, more as a shared process between teachers and students in class. So here we have the research. So the aim of general of the research is to explore and analyze assessment approaches and practices used in the secondary schools of the Italian context. And as I already said, this is a part of a broader PhD of my PhD project. And you can see that in the red circle, there is this type of contribution that is part of my explorative phase, and then we will have an empirical phase and some other research curve. The main research question is, what assessment practices do teachers implement in the context of Italian secondary schools? And in particular, we are focusing on try to understand the conceptualization, the tools and assessment practices emerged from the school statements, and then how these are related to the theoretical framework and the national guidelines. How can we try to answer to all these questions? We try to create a representative stratified sample of the Italian schools. So we downloaded a file by the Ministry of Education, which included all the schools in Italy, the preschool, the primary school, the secondary, the middle and high schools. But we kept in the file only the middle school and high schools subdivided by region. For the middle school, we try to we analyze the 5% of the total. So it means 357 middle schools. Whereas in the high school, we cannot do the same because, as many other countries, in Italy we have lots of different types of high schools, and we wanted to kept also these different types of schools in our analysis. So you can see that we have lots of different types, a lot of different mix of these types. So we can have only professional institute, or only technical institute, or only liceo. But also we have a mix. So a school can be a professional and technical, or a professional and technical and liceo, or something like that. So it's like that we have all these 8 types of schools, and we kept the type of schools and the regions to create the representative sample for the high school that is made by 339 high schools plus 30 units of high schools for that category that in the national calculation should have 0 cases. But in fact, for example, in Italy, we have in some regions, for example, in some professional institute, we can have only 1 school. I can say, for example, in Veneto, my region, we have only 1 professional schools in the total sample, and we want to keep all these type of schools in our sample. So for each school, we downloaded two main documents, the 3-year educational offer plans and the self-evaluation report. These documents serves the school evaluation system. So they are useful for understand how the school are trying to innovate and how they are organized and how they can offer an educational offer to the context. But they also discuss about assessment. So we are trying to use this type of documents useful for our research. The 3 years education offer plans is like the identity card of our schools. It shows the offer plans, their strategic choices, their organization, their context, and it's useful for understand how the school is connecting with the context and how families can choose a school to another by looking at this type of documents. So here we have the 4 areas and we are focused on the educational offer. Whereas the self-evaluation report is brought by a group of teachers of each schools and with the headmaster, and they add to analysis and verification their own service based on some criteria that are made by the Ministry of Education. So we are trying to, we did a data analysis with the construction of a codebook for a bottom-up method. And we did a qualitative content analysis with the Atlas TE software. We were in 2 judges, and that we, in the first phase, we made an independent analysis. Then we shared our first codes and we tried to calculate the intra-class correlation coefficient, which shows us that we have a high level of agreement on our codes and our analysis, and then we continue and follow and finish all the analysis of all the 700 or more of documents. All the codes were also categorized in 7 groups that are the same groups for the middle schools and the high schools, and we can say, and you can see that these groups are the assessment practices and tools. It is the main group code that is represented in the total of codes. How do teachers communicate the assessment, and where do they communicate assessment? What are the conceptualization? So what are the types of assessment that is used in schools? We can also say that assessment is a shared process, but you will say that it's not a shared process with students and families, but also between teachers. We also analyze some tools for assessment and assessment timing. For example, they says a lot of time that we do the final assessment or the assessment in itinerary, so during all the school year, or some initial assessment, something like that. So for the middle school, we have more than 5,000 total accuracies, divided in 150 codes and in the 7 groups. And the main code group was the assessment practices and tools, followed by the conceptualization of assessment. About the conceptualization of assessment, we can say that the middle schools talk about formative assessment, but also collegial assessment. So some means that the assessment is viewed as a process shared by the teachers and made by a group of teachers. So it's not only the assessment about only one teacher to all the class, but they have some shared criteria or shared documents that are used for assessment. And about the practices and tools in the middle school, we used mainly the tests and the self-assessment and some oral exam or some evaluation test. I know that it's a general indication, but these documents have some limits, where one of these is that they are too much general and too much not specific and not describing each assessment practice that we can use in class. For some other examples. So we can have the criteria agreed upon the teachers. So the assessment is discussed as a shared process, but only with teachers, not with families or students. They use the criteria or the indicators, and they mainly use the grades or the synthetic judgment, like very good, excellent, or good. Like they are not the narrative feedbacks that I was talking in the theoretical framework. For the high schools, we have the same 7 code groups, a less number of codes, but the main group is the assessment practices and tools, followed also always by the conceptualization of assessment and also tools for teachers. So in the high school, we have a conceptualization of assessment view as a formative and summative assessment, and a transparent process. Like we discuss with families and we say anything that we have to say about assessment to families, but there's no evidence of the construction of a process, of a shared process with students and families. In the assessment practices, you can also see the oral exam, the assessment exam, the assessment test, the written exam. So all the assessment practices that are made by teachers to students, and that does not get an involvement of students in their design and implementing. This, you can see that they are mostly the same codes also for the high school. So we have the criteria and they use the grades and the judgment like in the middle schools. So for the other documents, so the self-evaluation report, we have to say that more than the 80% of the documents analyzed have the same formulation. So I will not show you the data, and that's why we are trying to understand if this document is useful for the school. If this document is personalized by the school, or it's something that the school has to do, and they do using a file downloaded by the ministry and not personalized, or not add something that is strictly connected with that school and that context. We will proceed with the administration of the questionnaire and the request of ability for an interview in order to understand if the statement that we can read and analyze in the school documents are also shared with teachers and families that are in that school that we consider for the representative sample. So in conclusion, we can say that assessment is described as a continuous and integrated process, but it's carried out only by the teachers to monitor and certify the learning. We have a strong adherence to the formative and summative assessment models, which really involve the active participation of students. And we have in total of all the total occurrences, we have only 23 occurrences about feedback, like the narrative feedback. So it means that it's not a feedback that is used in the schools, but we know that it's fundamental for trying to create an assessment for learning or a sustainable assessment approach in our schools. In contrast, we have the terms such as level grades or tests or final assessment that are widely used in our documents. So here we are with the references, and thank you for the attention.
Again, perfect timing, excellent.